The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119.
Before Epstein was the Franklin cover-up. Before that, the Finders. And long before that, the Cleveland street scandal. Pedogate Primer is a concise intro and overview of a growing child abuse epidemic worldwide. It features shocking instances of institutionalized and organizational pedophilia throughout history. Churches, cults, the world of arts and entertainment, the government, NGOs, charities, and major corporations are all complicit or culprits in many instances. Pedogate Primer delves into material that for many may seem like the stuff of conspiracy theories. For this reason, the book draws on academic resources, declassified documents, and other reliable sources, and steers clear of conjecture. Such shocking true stories need no embellishment.
If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting, either through my website, emailrevealer.com, or you can just email me directly at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our show, check out our Patreon. We put up 8 hours of brand new content each month on Patreon, but there's a lot of free stuff too. I put up a lot of free content on there. If you just check it out, we just put up the Lauren Boebert's criminal record up there. She's a House of Representatives a member in Colorado, and we dug up her criminal record. We put up there for you. And also, too, you can go to our Spreaker channel, SPREAKER.com, Spreaker, and that's where we have our free content. All the archives are up there for free. You can sign up for free. You get an email notification anytime I put up new content. I do a live show on there every Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And there's a chat room where you can communicate with other listeners at Spreaker.com. Our guest today is Gordon Woods. He's coming to us from Scotland. And he's written a book called Being Put Through the Hoops. And you can get that on his website, beingputthroughthehoops.co.uk. Now, you can go there and pre-order and without any money or anything. You just go there and send him a notice that you want to order the book. He'll put you on a list. There's some litigation going on, so you can't deliver the book yet until the litigation is completed. But get yourself on the list there, beingputthroughthehoops.co.uk. Mr. Gordon Woods, are you there?
Hello, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a difficult topic to talk about. And I know that even before the show, I like to book these kind of shows real quick and say, hey, let's do it the next day. Because I know that preparing, you relive all this stuff. And then even after the interview, you're going over this stuff in your head. It's very difficult. But before we get into the topic of the show, which is this Celtic Boys Club and the ordeal you went through with them, can you tell us about yourself? Who is Gordon Woods?
Ed, I'm now a pensioner in Scotland. I'm nearly 67 years old. I am a single father. I've got 3 children, the youngest of which is at the moment 11 years old. And I've had my daughter on my own since she was 10 months old. So that's aged me probably more than anything else in my life. I currently live in the north of Scotland, in a small village. But over the last couple of years, there have been issues that have came to the forefront of my mind that I had managed to hide away for nearly 5 decades. And due to events that were happening in Scotland with a particularly world-renowned football club, or soccer club, I should say, for the American audience, the world-renowned soccer club, and some of the things that have been happening at that club over the last 50 years has been horrific. And I just felt that I had a duty to come forward and make light of what has been happening on behalf of the many, many victims of that club.
So you only came forward with your story just recently?
I came forward in September of 2019.
Wow.
So you're talking about 51 years I was silent. There are many reasons for that, Ed. But yes, I was silent for more than 50 years. And it was really a lot of events were just beginning to appear. Several of the officials who were responsible for the children at the club at the time were appearing in court. They were facing tremendous amount of media attention, which a lot of it was being denied by the club. And I felt that I had some of the evidence that was required to put this to bed once and for all, and to get the victims the apology that they've been asking for decades.
So let me see if I have this clear. There was some other litigation going on, and that's what inspired you to come forward too.
Yes, there's been the first set of litigation, I believe, was in 1998, when the first of many, should I say, the first official of the Celtic Boys Club was found guilty in a court of law of abusing children, and he was sentenced and served a time in prison. Since 1998, over the last 20 years, there's been others. And in fact, that individual who was imprisoned in 1998 has subsequently, after his release, he was released from prison, and he moved to USA. And he was living in the States when other allegations came to light. And the BBC at the time did a documentary, and they traced this individual. His name is Jim Torbett. They traced Jim Torbett to America. And he refused, obviously, to return to the UK because of his charges were going to be placed on him immediately he returned. They did the documentary, and the documentary aired in the United Kingdom. And within 24 or 48 hours of that documentary being aired, Jim Torbett was visited by Homeland Security in America and escorted to the airport and returned to Scotland, where he was immediately arrested on his return and charged. He is now currently serving a 6-year prison sentence.
And you were telling me off the air too that there was some of these offenses were taking place in Kearney, New Jersey.
Yeah, there's been accusations of abuse, child abuse by Jim Torbett in Florida. But the most striking issue was an incident in 1991 when there was accusations against an individual who cannot be named for legal reasons. Accusations were made against him by 2 young lads who were visiting the States from Scotland in Kearney, New Jersey. Now, these accusations were very severe, and basically what happened was the parents of the children involved were given a choice, and that choice was either to take this further and have the individual questioned by the police, or allow the young lad to return home. Now, the choice they had was horrific, because if they had decided that they wanted the official of the boys' club to be investigated, it would have meant him being arrested and the children being taken into care in America. Now, this all transpired, I think, just a couple of days before the boys were due to return home. So the parents made the decision that the person being accused was not to be reported to the police, and the children were allowed to return home to Scotland. However, Celtic Football Club insisted that the individual resigned on his return to Scotland. Now, there was a meeting that was held in Boston Airport between 4 Celtic officials, Jim McNally, Bill Gilfillan, John Gallagher and Willie Houghton. And they had put this scenario to the boys' parents. They also tried to contact one of the Celtic Football Club directors, Jack McGinn. He was not available, so the decision was made by Sean McMullen and Bob Crelly to let the boys return home, and the individual who was being accused was returned to Scotland without charge. It was horrific. It was an atrocious position for the children to be put in, and their parents, of course.
And let me ask you a question, though. Who was it that was threatening to put these children into foster care? Was it the local Kearney Police Department?
Yes, I believe it was. It was a case of if the charges had been placed, and there was an accusation of child abuse. The records are showing that this individual would have been arrested by the police in America, and the children, whose parents were not there, of course, their parents were back in Scotland, and the only adult with any responsibility for them in America would have been the accused.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they would have been taken into care by the American authorities. How long that would have lasted for, no one knows, because it didn't transpire. But it could have been days, it could have been weeks, it could have been months. And of course, the boys' parents didn't want that. They just wanted their children home. Now,
the Celtic Boys Club, how many people within the Celtic boys clubs are guilty of these activities?
At the moment, there have been 6 convictions. Now, bearing in mind that a lot of this information has only come to light fairly recently, and although the abuse happened decades ago, it's only now that more and more people are coming forward. And up until now, there have been 6 convictions. There are investigations ongoing at the moment. They're live investigations. As far as I'm aware, there was a person involved with the Celtic setup who some time ago gave a list of names to the police for investigation. This individual was accusing 14 different people involved with Celtic or Celtic Boys Club that he was accusing of paedophilia. Now, the children could have been Celtic had boys teams for 10 years of age and over, so anything probably between 10 and 16 years of age, children were being abused. Now, the police were given a list of 14 names. Now, if you're talking about 14 people, that's not unlucky. That doesn't happen at one club, that 14 paedophiles are involved with one club. That's systematic. That's a paedophile ring operating within who were at that time probably one of the most famous soccer clubs in the world. They weren't unlucky. They knew this was going on.
Is there any evidence that the officials, the people at the head of this Celtic Boys Club were aware of this and were helping to cover it up?
Obviously that's being looked at the moment, and there are cases. Obviously you're aware of the COVID situation worldwide, and this COVID scenario has held up a tremendous amount of cases in Scotland. Around about last April or May, the legal team who are representing many of the victims lodged papers in court to sue Celtic Football Club, not the boys' club, Celtic Football Club, who had a duty of care to these children. Now, those civil actions have never yet seen the courtroom because of the delays through COVID. Now, when these civil actions hit the courtroom, this is when the evidence will come forward as to who knew, when they knew, and what they actually did about it. But that's still to be seen in a court of law. Nothing has been decided on by the judiciary at this point, but it is ongoing, and hopefully it won't be long until the victims start to see the justice that they deserve.
Do you feel comfortable telling us what happened to you, what your experience was?
Yeah, of course. See, to let you understand, Ed, when I first came forward, I wanted to remain anonymous, as most of the victims do. Now, I was faced with a choice because not long after I came forward, there were certain elements of my story which rang alarm bells with the legal team and some of the media, because some of my story, they were able to collaborate what I was telling them. And my legal team asked me, would I speak to the press, and would I speak to radio, and would I speak to television? Now, I made that decision then. If I was going to be a spokesperson, not just a victim, victims have the right to remain anonymous, and I respect their decision to do that. The reason I decided not to was I decided that being a spokesperson and getting this out to as many people worldwide as I possibly could would only be achieved if I waived my anonymity. Because I'm asking millions of people to look into my eyes and listen to what I'm saying and appreciate that I'm telling the truth. Now, for them to do that, I had to have faith in the public, and that's why I waived my anonymity. So, although sometimes it's difficult to talk about what happened, it's a requisite that someone has to do that so that people are aware of how severe it can be. Now, I was 13 years old when I first had a trial for Celtic Boys Club. And as I've said on other occasions, I was deemed unsuccessful on the night because it's just a case of I wasn't good enough to be entered into the boys' club. I wasn't a good enough footballer, soccer player. However, within a short period of time after being rejected, I was approached by an individual who said to me, "Don't worry about that, Gordon. Come back to training next week." Now, that person who invited me back to training was the person who, within a very short period of time of that, started to sexually abuse me. My own abuse went from heavy petting, touching, and it escalated over a period of a year where it was getting to a point where it was attempted rape. Now, as I've said, in fact, very recently, that my experience was 50 years ago. And although it's a very strange way to put it, I feel that I was lucky that when I was abused by the paedophiles at the soccer club, they hadn't at that time got the confidence that they needed to take things further and to an even greater degree of depravity. And the abuse I suffered was nowhere near on the level that many children abused in the later stages of the abuse, because my God, it went on for 30 or 40 years. In fact, one of the individuals that we're talking about, the individual who abused me, was actually thrown out the boys' club by the then manager, Jock Stein, very famous soccer manager in Europe. Jock Stein threw Jim Torbitt out the boys' club because of rumours that he was abusing the boys. Now, Jock Stein left Celtic 3 or 4 years after that, and unbelievably, Celtic Boys Club brought that paedophile back into the club.
Wow.
And he went on then, after that, he went on for 2 more decades to abuse dozens and dozens of children. It's absolutely horrific when, and this is not an accusation, by the way, this is common knowledge, that Jim Torbitt was thrown out the club and by Jock Stein. Jock Stein left Celtic to manage the Scottish national team, and a short time after that, Jim Torbitt was invited back to the boys' club.
So this gentleman that was running things, Jock Stein, you called him?
Jock Stein, yes.
Yeah, so I guess he wasn't going to put up with that, but then after he left, everything was wide open again, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, to let you understand the scenario with Jim Torbitt, when in 1967, Celtic had just won, at that time, the most coveted prize in European soccer. It was a European Cup. No British team had ever won it. And Celtic were the first British team to win this trophy. Now, at that same time, we have this scenario where a young lad of 21 years of age, i.e. Jim Torbitt, who had no soccer management experience, He never played soccer. He was asked by Jock Stein and Sir Bob Kelly to start a boys' club. Now, I don't think for 1 minute, this club at the time was one of the most, they just won the European Cup. They were one of the most famous clubs in the world. And yet, here was them offering to start a boys' club to an individual with no football experience whatsoever. That could only have been for someone in that club, as far as I'm concerned, knew of his paedophile tendencies, and that boys' club was initially set up for that purpose and that purpose only, was to facilitate a paedophile ring access to young boys.
And that sounds legit. That sounds like a good theory. But my question is that being brought up in the court today? Is that being addressed?
Yes, of course it
Good.
is, yeah. You see, there's another scenario here where, I did an interview, and unfortunately the Scottish media and the Scottish governments, and not just the current Scottish governments, because the Scottish government is currently the Scottish National Party. But this goes back many decades, so the Labour Party are also involved in this as well, where for decades governments have turned a blind eye. They don't want to investigate it. Media don't want to report on it. Now, why that is, I don't have an answer to. I can only assume that there's some kind of involvement there where the politicians in the judiciary don't want this to come out in the open because they're doing as much as they possibly can to hide it. Now, this can't be allowed to go on, and hopefully now that the court cases have started, because there's been court cases in the past with individuals for charges of paedophilia. There has never been a court case as yet in Scotland as to who was responsible, who enabled it, when did they know about it, what did they do to stop it, or what did they do to encourage it. That's going to be found out in the courts of law, hopefully very, very soon.
Is the BBC covering the story otherwise besides the interview with you that was squashed?
Very little. You see, with the BBC interview I did, the BBC did an interview with an ex-professional soccer player in Scotland. He played for many clubs. He played for the Scottish national team. And they did an interview with him when the subject of child abuse at Celtic Boys Club was brought up. And this individual made a comment where he felt the parents were to blame.
Wow.
And he made a comment and he laughed. He laughed about children being frightened to sit in the front seat of the coaches' cars because they would be touched when they were sitting in the front seat beside the coach. Now, I was so angry at that, Ed, because I was one of those children. I was one of those children who sat in the front seat of a Celtic Boys Club coach's car and was sexually abused. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it funny when it happened, and I don't find it funny 50 years later. I thought it was a horrific thing to say. So I spoke to my legal team, and my lawyers arranged for me to be interviewed on the same programme a few days later to answer those comments that he made. Now, the interview took place, and the interviewer, John Beattie, very fair as far as I was concerned. He asked questions that he had to ask, and I answered as best I could. There was no issue with that. And John then called me and said, look, it'll go out within a day or two. And then it'll go out next week. And then, we're just making a few adjustments. It'll be probably next week before it's out, Gordon. And then suddenly I got a call from him to say it wasn't being aired. The hierarchy at the BBC, British Broadcasting Corporation, had decided not to air my response. Now, you've got to remember that BBC have a history of covering up paedophilia, and the most serious of that was when the BBC for decades hid the fact that Jimmy Savile was working with BBC and involved in paedophilia for decades. And the BBC have covered that, and they're still covering it up, and even now, today, there's very, very little reporting on what's happening here in Scotland. You've got one or two journalists have now got the bit between their teeth, and they're not frightened. Remember, Ed, we're talking about very powerful organisations here. You know, we're talking about a soccer club that is world famous. It has millions upon millions of supporters throughout the world. There are very powerful people within government, within the judiciary. There's very powerful people who've got a vested interest in protecting that club. I don't have a vested interest in protecting them. I just want the truth to come out. And all the victims initially were asking for, and I'm going back 1998 when the first court cases took place and it was the first convictions. Many of the victims were asking for an apology. That's what they wanted. They wanted an apology. But Celtic have continually denied that they were responsible and refused to issue the apology. And all that Celtic have done in the last 20 years, when they've been separating themselves from the Celtic Boys Club and saying that they had nothing to do with them, they were two separate things, nothing to do with Celtic. All they've done in that 20 years, instead of holding their hands up, accepting responsibility and apologising, they have spent the last 20 years abusing those same children, who are now adults of course, but abusing them over and over and over again, and putting their lives through hell again by having to prove, instead of just admitting it, apologising, and we can all move on. All the victims can move on. We can be at peace. We've got our apology. We've got our justice. Give us that. But don't keep taunting us and abusing us more by this ridiculous excuse that Celtic have that they weren't responsible.
This is a good time to take a commercial break. We are here today with Mr. Gordon Woods. His website is beingputthroughhoops.co.uk, and it's also the name of the book, Being Put Through Hoops, that you can pre-order now. You don't have to send any money or anything. Just send them a little note there that you want to be put on the list, and you'll get an autographed copy of the book when it's finally published after this litigation is done. And for people listening to the show, if you want to hear about Jimmy Savile, I actually interviewed Jimmy Savile's niece, who was abused by Jimmy Savile. Fascinating story. You can find that in the Opperman Report Patreon. Just an incredible story by this young woman who was dressed up by her family and presented to Jimmy Savile when she was just a child, and then he showed up again later on the night of her engagement party and molested her again at around 19 years old. We'll be right back with more of Gordon Woods and Being Put Through Hoops after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Silk City Hot Sauce, a small batch hot sauce prepared with farm-grown peppers. Rich and vibrant taste, no artificial ingredients, 100% pure goodness. 8 flavors from mild to wild. The the sweet and spicy Mango Madness, the green jalapeno sauce called Aztec Attack. The Dragon features fire-roasted peppers and pure Vermont maple syrup. Killer hot sauces for the true hot sauce fanatic, a blend of ghost peppers, habanero peppers, honey, and garlic, and more. You gotta see the bottles, too. Each flavor has original comic book artwork. You gotta see them. Go to SilkCityHotSauce.com. SilkCityHotSauce.com. Enter promo code ED, ED, to save 15%, and you'll also receive a free bottle of hot sauce. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. Emailrevealer.com. People ask me all the time, hey, Ed, are you still a private investigator? I sure am. Go to emailrevealer.com. We handle adoption investigations, infidelity investigations, where you give us your spouse's email address. We trace it back to online dating websites, catch them cheating online. Email tracing, locate or identify somebody from as little as an anonymous email address. Someone owe you money? Back child support? We can find that deadbeat, locate his hidden assets, locate his hidden bank accounts, find his current place of employment, and even assist you in obtaining a judgment and recover that judgment for you. Emailrevealer.com, digital forensics, computer forensics, cell phone forensics, recover deleted text messages, create a report that you can use in court. Emailrevealer.com, 800-572-9762.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. We're talking today to Gordon Woods. He's coming to us from Scotland. His book is called Being Put Through the Hoops, and you can find it at his website, beingputthroughthehoops.co.uk. And you can also find him on, he's very prolific on Twitter. Let me see if I can pull up his Twitter. What's your Twitter name there, mister? Okay, it's Gordon Woods, then in parentheses, a Celtic CSA victim survivor. Gordon Woods, a Celtic CSA victim survivor. You can find him there on Gordon W09225-415. And if you know any information about this, and if you're in Kearney, New Jersey, down in Florida, you have any information about this Jim Torbett, get a hold of me. We'll put together a case for you. Mr. Woods, now, when you were going through this ordeal as a young lad there on the soccer team, were you aware of any other boys that were also being abused?
Not at the time, Ed. I didn't, and it was only, when I was, I was thrown out of Celtic Boys Club by Jim Torbett. Now that itself is another story, because when I was thrown out of Celtic Boys Club. I was given no reason. Jim Torby just told me, don't come back to the club. And the night he told me that, I was sitting in the back of his car, and in the front seat of his car was another young lad. I can't mention his name because he has asked me not to. I have spoken to him recently, and he was sitting in the front seat. So Jim Torby told me to get out of the car, not to come back to Celtic Boys Club, and that was it.
Wow.
I then realised, I found out 30 years later, I found out in 1998 that young lad who was sitting in Jim Torbett's seat that night when I was told not to come back was Jim Torbett's next victim. And that individual was one of the young lads who was responsible for Torbett's conviction in 1998. Now, I didn't know about that until the court cases. When the first court case turned up and Jim Torbett was jailed for, I think it was 2 years ago, and this name was in the newspaper, I thought, that's the guy who was in the seat the night Jim Torbett threw me out. So it appears that Jim Torbett had already arranged my replacement to abuse before he got rid of me. Now, that's how systematic it was. Now, the only reason I found that out was because my mother was dying of cancer. And I for many years had because what happened when I first left Celtic Boys Club, I ran away from home, Ed. And I was away for a tremendous amount of time. In fact, I ended up as a 16-year-old in Santa Monica in California. And I ran away from home. I was away for nearly just over a year, I think, and I was all over Europe, America, Canada. I visited Mexico. But I was eventually caught in Santa Monica and returned to my parents. Now, after that happened, my family relationship fell apart completely, and it was many years past where I had no contact with siblings, which I had 5 siblings. I had very little contact with them, very little contact with my mother and my father, and that was what my life had become due to the abuse. However, this particular time, my mother was dying of cancer, and I received a call from a friend who said, look, your mum's ill. So I hadn't seen my mother at this point for, I think it was nearly 8 years. I hadn't seen my mother. And I visited her home. She'd divorced from my father at this point, and I visited her home just outside Colchester in England. And a few days before she died, she brought up the issue that Jim Torbett had been in the papers there because of this child abuse. And she asked me if Jim Torbett had ever touched me or hurt me, and I said, no, Mum, he hadn't. Ed, my mother was very ill, and there was no way that I wanted to start discussing this with her. I was going to inflict this guilt on my mother at that stage in her life. Something that I'd kept quiet about for 30 years at that point. I wasn't going to start discussing it with my mother then. And so I denied all knowledge, and I said, no, Mum, there's nothing to worry about. Don't just get yourself comfortable. Let's, look at your own scenario. She then turned to me, Ed, and she says, Gordon, your dad and I found a letter that you had written to you had written to Jim Torbett. And in that letter, you'd asked Jim Torbett to stop hurting you. What did you mean by that?
Wow.
Now, again, I didn't want to discuss it with her, and I said, Mum, I'm not prepared to talk about it. That was the first time. Now, what my mother then said was that my father, and this was in 1968, remember, this was before hundreds of other children were abused. My father had sent the letter that I had written to Jock Stein in Celtic Football Club with a covering letter from him. Now, it's my belief that Jock Stein got the letter, approached Torbett and said, get something done about this, and what the answer to Celtic Football Club was to keep the abuser, keep the paedophile, but get rid of the child that had been abused, to shut him up. Now, at that point, as my mother told me that was the first time, Ed, in 30 years that it penetrated with me that I wasn't the only one that was abused. There was other children abused. But for 30 years, I'd been working on the assumption that I was the only one. And then it suddenly became obvious that there was dozens. Now, this poses a very awkward scenario for a victim, because people say, why do victims stay silent for so long? Let me give you one indication of that. When I stayed silent for that 30 years, it suddenly there was a realization to me that because of my silence, many other children were abused. Perhaps if I hadn't remained silent, perhaps if I had shouted from the rooftops about the abuse, I could have saved all those children from being abused. So there's an element then of guilt attaches to the victim. That it's the victim's fault. It's my fault that 50 or 60 or 100 children were abused, because if I'd spoken up, I could have saved those children. Now, that's something that we live with as victims. So we continue to stay quiet because we've got that. Not only were we abused as children, which has its own horrors, of course, but then we were saying, I could have helped those kids. So there's a guilt attaches to it.
But what about, weren't there adults around you, teachers and doctors and older brothers and sisters who might have noticed something going on with you?
No, because you see, they didn't know. I did. I had 3 elder brothers. Now, you'll read from, once the book's released, there's the start of the book is about my relationship with my family before I went to Celtic Boys Club. And part of that was I had no relationship with my 3 elder brothers. I had 3 elder brothers who formed this little gang in the house, and I was there. They bullied me constantly. So that they're certainly somebody I would never have approached them. But no, I didn't. What the only thing that was questioned was for 3 or 4 years prior to the abuse starting, I was always in the top 5 or the top 6 in my class in school. I was doing very, very well at school, and it was my ambition at that point. I wanted to be a pilot with the RAF or a veterinary surgeon. That was what was in the back of my mind at all points in time. Now, once the abuse started, I went from top 5, and this was within a year, by the way. I went from top 5 to the bottom 5. I failed every single exam I sat, and that was questioned. But there's a fear that, you see, the paedophiles put a fear in you. They've got this control of you, and this is where people don't realise. And as I said in a recent interview, the very first thing that Jim Torbett said to me, the very first time I was abused, when he finished, he said to me, Gordon, I won't tell your mum and dad what you've done. Now that's the paedophile putting the blame on me, saying that I did that. It was me that was a bad one. So I'm not going to approach anybody. I'm not going to approach my parents or my school teachers or my brothers and say, I've done something terrible. Of course I hadn't, but the paedophile makes you believe that they have. And remember, a 13-year-old boy in the 60s was totally different from a 13-year-old boy nowadays. In those days, the innocence of children was unbelievable compared to nowadays. But this is what we were up against. You're you didn't have somebody you could go to, especially when you're being made out to be the bad one. Because I had a fear then. My fear was if anybody found out about this, I'm in trouble.
So, Mr. Woods, we're running out of time, and you wanted me to ask you about the Scottish Football Association that did a report?
Yeah, but what happened is the Scottish Government did an independent inquiry into child abuse in Scotland. But for some obscure reason, the Scottish Government decided not to include football clubs or religious organisations. Which to me is where two of the areas that needed looked at more than anything else. However, they did ask the Scottish Football Association to do an Scottish Football Association to do their own review. So here we are, the Scottish Football Association, who have their own charges to face. They were marking their own homework. They were doing a report on themselves. It was scandalous. Anyway, it took a couple of years, and it was in 2018, I think it was in June 2018, the first report was issued, the interim report was issued in June 2018. And the victims were eagerly awaiting the final report, which would hopefully give them some peace. It took them nearly 3 years to release the final report. From the interim report to the final report, nearly 3 years has passed. Now that was 3 years that they had to doctor it, monitor it, retract from it, do whatever they needed to do to it to clean it up. But most of the victims I've spoken to who have now seen the report are all of the same opinion. It's a whitewash. It's absolutely horrific what they've missed from the report, or what they're trying to imply by the report as to who's responsible for what. It's not worth the paper it's written on.
Oh boy. Well, we're talking today to Gordon Woods, and the book once again is called Being Put Through the Hoops. Being Put Through Hoops. And you can find it at the website, beingputthroughhoops.co.uk. Mr. Woods, what do you want to leave us with? We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah, I just think that, all the victims want is peace. And I mean, there's been victims from this child abuse over the years in football that are no longer with us. They're no longer with us because they've taken their own lives. And in their memory, surely we can have some kind of closure on this, where the guilty parties admit they're guilty, apologise, and let us live the rest of our lives in peace. We don't want this fight. We don't need this fight. We've got lives to lead as best we can. Just let us get on with it and admit responsibility, and let's everybody move on and make sure it doesn't happen again in the future.
Once again, Gordon Woods, thank you so much. I know how difficult it is to get all this out. Hopefully it get to the right ears and someone will get some help out there. The book, once again, is called Being Put Through Hoops.co.uk. You can pre-order. It's not for print yet until this litigation is done, but it will be soon. Mr. Gordon Woods, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks.
And now a word from our sponsors. Hey guys, if you like the show and you want to show your support, check out the Opperman Report Patreon. You can go there and become a member for $3 a month. We have all the shows that you hear Monday through Friday on AM/FM radio. We have all those shows, but we cut out the ads, so you can hear that content ad-free. There's a $5 section where we put up all the old member section shows are going up over there. And then there's a $10 section where we have brand new content. 8 hours of exclusive content per month goes up there in the $10 section. But listen, I put up a lot of free stuff too. We put up documents, court documents, photographs, announcements. So you should make the Opperman Report Patreon a stop. You should stop there once a day and check out what's going on over there. That's Opperman Report Patreon. The Opperman Report is brought to you by Aquadam.net. You can give them a call at 707-764-2119. A flooded home is never easy to deal with. You're left with the mess to clean up, the insurance companies to deal with, and not to mention all the memories, the precious memories that are lost in the flood. You can never replace those. And Aquadam can be a tool in your arsenal to protect your home and property from the floodwaters. The cofferdam is filled with water to control water and is reusable as long as it's taken care of. It can protect your home or business from rising floodwaters like a dam, but without the beavers. It can also be used in construction. If you need an area to be dewatered, an Aquadam can do the job. An Aquadam was used at SeaWorld in Orlando for the Mako roller coaster ride during the coaster's construction by dewatering the work area. An Aquadam is now dewatering the work area at San Antonio SeaWorld for their newest roller coaster ride. An Aquadam has been used in many construction projects all around the U.S. and all around the world. Now give Aquadam a call, 707-764-2119. You can look them up online at aquadam.net. You can find them on Facebook at Aquadam Inc. You call them up, you email them, you tell them Ed Opperman sent you, and they're going to take 10% off the price. Aquadam.net, 707-764-2119. If you find yourself in need of legal representation, it can be a very stressful time in your life. In my career, I have dealt with thousands of lawyers, I've dealt with thousands of law firms, and I can confidently recommend to you Keith M. Davidson at kmdlaw.com. Available 24 hours, 7 days a week. Just log into kmdlaw.com. That's kmdlaw.com. Or you can call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. That's 833-4KMD-LAW. Personal injury, wrongful death, STDs, sexual assault, car accidents. They handle it all efficiently and professionally. It doesn't matter how imposing the opposition may be, because the team at kmdlaw.com are battle-tested and fierce. They will not stop until justice prevails. Go to kmdlaw.com or call toll-free 833-4KMD-LAW. If you're in for the fight of your life, stop screwing around and contact KMD Law. Hey, if you have something you want to promote, like a business or a website, you got a big event coming up, consider advertising on the Opperman Report. We have excellent advertising rates for you. We're on KCAA on 3 different frequencies on AM/FM in California, KSHP 1400 AM in Nevada, WWPR in Florida, the Tampa Bay area, 1490 AM, and also WWNN, which is on the east coast of Florida, all the way from Miami up to Port Bay, with 175 miles of I-95. The advertising rates are very affordable. Once your ad goes up and we play the show on the podcast and on the YouTube channel, those ads stay up there forever. And then we play repeats every single night of classic Opperman Report shows. And your new ads will be inserted into those repeats that play every single night. So the saturation is incredible, and the rates are very affordable. Contact me at oppermanreport@gmail.com.
Before Epstein was the Franklin cover-up. Before that, the Finders. And long before that, the Cleveland street scandal. Pedogate Primer is a concise intro and overview of a growing child abuse epidemic worldwide. It features shocking instances of institutionalized and organizational pedophilia throughout history. Churches, cults, the world of arts and entertainment, the government, NGOs, charities, and major corporations are all complicit or culprits in many instances. Pedogate Primer delves into material that for many may seem like the stuff of conspiracy theories. For this reason, the book draws on academic resources, declassified documents, and other reliable sources, and steers clear of conjecture. Such shocking, true stories need no embellishment.